What happens when Hollywood royalty meets late-night television's sharpest wit, and the conversation takes a turn that nobody saw coming? You won't believe what unfolds when a routine promotional appearance transforms into one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. Tonight we're diving deep into the shocking events that left audiences stunned, social media in an uproar, and one of the world's most famous figures storming off set in what can only be described as a complete meltdown. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two titans of their respective worlds collide in the most unexpected way possible. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was supposed to be just another Tuesday night taping, another standard celebrity appearance to promote charitable causes and upcoming projects. The CBS studio audience was buzzing with anticipation, as they always do, but tonight felt different. There was an electric tension in the air that even the most seasoned production staff couldn't quite put their finger on. The warm-up comedian had finished his set, the cameras were rolling, and Stephen Colbert sat behind his desk with that trademark smirk that has made him one of television's most beloved and feared interviewers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show Meghan Markle," Colbert announced with his usual theatrical flair, gesturing toward the stage entrance as the band struck up their signature guest entrance music. Meghan emerged from behind the curtain wearing an elegant navy blazer and a smile that seemed perfectly calibrated for the cameras. She waved to the audience with practiced grace, the kind of wave that had been perfected through years of royal protocol and public appearances. The studio audience erupted in applause, some even standing as she made her way across the stage. But those paying close attention might have noticed something slightly different in her demeanor. A subtle tension in her shoulders, a barely perceptible tightness around her eyes that suggested this wasn't going to be the typical softball interview both sides had probably expected. As Meghan settled into the guest chair, adjusting her blazer and crossing her legs with the poise of someone who had done this dance countless times before, Colbert leaned back in his chair with that characteristic lean that signals he's about to dig deeper than the surface-level pleasantries most talk show hosts settle for. "Meghan, welcome to the show," Colbert began, his tone warm but with an underlying edge that regular viewers would recognize as his preparation for something more substantive. "It's great to have you here, especially after everything that's been happening in the news lately." The audience chuckled at what seemed like a harmless reference to the constant media coverage that follows every member of the former royal family. But Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment, so brief that most viewers at home probably missed it, but the studio cameras caught everything. "Thank you for having me, Stephen," Meghan replied, her voice carrying that measured cadence that had become her trademark in interviews. "It's wonderful to be here, and I'm excited to talk about the incredible work we're doing with our foundation." But Colbert wasn't quite ready to move into promotional territory just yet. He shuffled his note cards with deliberate casualness, a gesture that anyone familiar with his interview style would recognize as the calm before the storm. "Before we get to that," he said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly, "I think a lot of people are curious about some of the recent statements you've made regarding your experience with certain institutions. There seems to be some, shall we say, inconsistencies that have people talking." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Meghan's posture straightened, and her media-trained smile became more fixed, less natural. The audience, sensing the shift in energy, grew quieter, leaning forward in their seats, as if they could feel something significant about to unfold. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Stephen," Meghan responded, her voice maintaining its composed tone but with a slight edge creeping in. "I've always been very clear and honest about my experiences." Colbert nodded slowly, tapping his pen against his desk, in a rhythm that seemed to match the increasing tension in the room. The studio lights felt hotter, the silence between words more loaded with meaning. "Well, that's exactly what I'd like to explore," he said, leaning forward slightly, his interviewing instincts clearly kicking into high gear as he sensed an opportunity to push beyond the usual celebrity talking points that had become the norm in late-night television. The audience could feel the shift happening in real time. What had started as a standard celebrity appearance was quickly transforming into something much more intense, much more unpredictable. Colbert's reputation for fearless journalism was about to collide head-on with Meghan's carefully constructed public persona, and the result was going to be television gold. For instance, Colbert continued, his voice taking on that investigative tone that had made him famous, "You've spoken extensively about feeling unsupported during your time in the royal family, but several former staff members have come forward with very different accounts of those same events. They've described situations where you allegedly made unreasonable demands and created hostile working environments. How do you reconcile those conflicting narratives?" The question hung in the air like a live wire. Meghan's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, calculation, and something that looked distinctly like anger flashing across her features before she managed to reassemble her media-trained composure. "I think it's unfortunate that people continue to spread these false narratives," Meghan replied, her voice rising slightly in pitch, a telltale sign that the carefully maintained facade was beginning to crack. "Those are disgruntled former employees who are trying to profit from their association with me." But Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, her defensive response seemed to energize him, like a shark detecting blood in the water. He leaned back in his chair, his expression remaining friendly even as his questions grew more pointed. "But these aren't anonymous sources we're talking about," he pressed. "These are people who worked closely with you, people who have put their names and reputations on the line to tell their stories. Are you saying they're all lying?" The studio audience was completely silent now, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Even the band members had stopped their usual between-segment chatter, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary unfold before their eyes. Meghan's hands gripped the arms of her chair slightly tighter, her knuckles showing the faintest hint of white. Her smile had completely disappeared now, replaced by a look of barely controlled frustration. "Stephen, I came here tonight to talk about the positive work I'm doing, not to relitigate old grievances," she said, her voice carrying a sharp edge that cut through the studio like a blade. "I think it's disappointing that you're choosing to focus on tabloid gossip instead of the real issues that matter." The accusation hit its mark. Colbert's eyebrows raised slightly, and for the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely surprised. But rather than backing down, he seemed to relish the challenge. "Tabloid gossip?" he repeated, his tone incredulous. "These are documented complaints filed with human resources departments. These are sworn statements from career professionals. With all due respect, that's not gossip. That's journalism." The words struck Meghan like a physical blow. Her carefully constructed composure finally began to crack in earnest, her face flushing slightly as her breathing became more shallow and rapid. "I don't think you understand the position I was in," she shot back, her voice now clearly strained with emotion. "I was dealing with an impossible situation, with people who had already made up their minds about me before I even walked through the door. And yet," Colbert countered smoothly, "multiple sources describe a pattern of behavior that goes back years, long before any royal connections. Former colleagues from your acting career, staff from your humanitarian work, they're all telling remarkably similar stories about demanding behavior and unrealistic expectations." The audience could sense that something major was about to happen. The energy in the room had shifted completely from entertainment to confrontation, and everyone present seemed to understand that they were witnessing a moment that would be talked about for years to come. Meghan's jaw clenched visibly as she struggled to maintain even a semblance of her public persona, but the mask was slipping fast. "You know what, Stephen?" Meghan said, her voice now carrying a dangerous edge that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. I find it really interesting that a white male comedian thinks he can sit there and lecture me about my experiences as a woman of color navigating these spaces. The accusation landed like a bomb in the studio. The audience audibly gasped, and even Colbert seemed momentarily taken aback by the sudden shift to accusations of racism and sexism. But his years of experience handling difficult interviews kicked in almost immediately. "That's a serious accusation," Colbert replied, his voice steady but clearly strained. "But I'm not questioning your experiences because of who you are. I'm questioning the contradictions in your public statements because that's what journalists do. That's what accountability looks like." Meghan let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the suddenly silent studio. Accountability? From someone who's never faced real scrutiny in his entire career? You sit behind this desk making jokes about people's lives while I've been torn apart by the media for years. The personal attack seemed to hit a nerve. Colbert's famous composure wavered for just a moment, his eyes flashing with something that looked like genuine anger before he regained control. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, he said, his voice growing firmer. "I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, and yes, celebrities who don't always like the questions I ask. But I've never had someone try to shut down legitimate journalism by playing identity politics." Identity politics? Meghan's voice rose to nearly a shout, causing several cameramen to adjust their positions to better capture what was clearly becoming a full-blown confrontation. "You think my lived experience is just politics? You think the racism and sexism I've faced is just some game?" The studio audience was completely silent now, watching in stunned fascination as two public figures engaged in what was becoming an increasingly personal and heated battle. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed riveted by the drama unfolding before them. "No one is questioning your experiences with racism or sexism," Colbert shot back, his own voice rising for the first time. "What I'm questioning is why you think those experiences give you a free pass to treat people badly and then claim victim status when they speak out about it." That was clearly the breaking point. Meghan's face flushed red with rage, and she leaned forward in her chair, pointing an accusatory finger directly at Colbert. "How dare you?" she spat, her carefully modulated voice now raw with emotion. "How dare you sit there and minimize what I've been through? You have no idea what it's like to have your every move scrutinized, your every word twisted, your family attacked by the press every single day." "Actually, I do know," Colbert replied coolly, his journalistic instincts taking over completely now. "I've been in the public eye for decades. I've had my family threatened, my character attacked, my career nearly destroyed multiple times. The difference is, I don't use those experiences as excuses to treat the people around me poorly." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Meghan's eyes blazed with fury, and for a moment it looked like she might actually lunge across the desk. Instead, she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "This is the kind of treatment that drove me away from everything I once believed in. You invite me here under false pretenses, ambush me with these attacks, and then act like you're some noble journalist seeking truth." "I invited you here to have an honest conversation," Colbert replied, remaining seated but clearly ready for whatever was coming next. "If you can't handle honest questions about your public statements and actions, maybe you shouldn't be making those statements in the first place." The entire studio held its breath as Meghan stood there trembling with rage, clearly struggling with whether to continue the fight or make her escape. "You know what your problem is, Stephen?" Meghan finally said, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried more threat than her earlier shouting. "You think because you have this platform, because you have these cameras, that gives you the right to destroy people for entertainment. You're no different from the tabloid journalists who made my life hell." The comparison clearly stung. Colbert's face hardened, and he stood up slowly, matching her aggressive posture for The first time in the interview. "Don't you dare compare me to tabloid journalists," he said, his voice ice cold. "I've spent my entire career fighting for truth and accountability. What you're doing right now is exactly what every corrupt politician and failed celebrity does. When they get caught, attack the messenger instead of addressing the message." "Caught?" Meghan's voice cracked with disbelief and fury. "Caught doing what? Trying to use my platform to help people? Trying to speak truth to power? The only thing I'm guilty of is believing that I could trust someone like you to have an honest conversation." "An honest conversation?" Colbert shot back, his own composure finally beginning to crack. "You've been deflecting and making excuses since the moment you sat down. You've accused me of racism, sexism, and now you're comparing me to the worst elements of journalism, all because I asked you to explain why multiple people who worked with you described the same pattern of problematic behavior." The studio audience was transfixed, many pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming one of the most explosive late-night television moments in recent memory. The production staff looked panicked, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation play out. "Problematic behavior?" Meghan laughed bitterly, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "You mean standing up for myself? You mean refusing to be treated like a second-class citizen? You mean expecting basic human decency from the people around me?" "No," Colbert replied firmly, his journalistic training keeping him focused despite the personal attacks. "I mean screaming at staff members until they cry. I mean making demands so unreasonable that seasoned professionals quit rather than deal with you. I mean claiming to champion women's rights while allegedly bullying female employees who couldn't fight back." The specific allegations hit their mark. Meghan's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, calculation, and then pure rage. She took a step closer to Colbert's desk, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Those are lies," she hissed. "Vicious, calculated lies designed to tear down a woman who dared to speak her truth. And you're complicit in spreading them." "They're not lies," Colbert replied steadily. "They're documented complaints with witnesses, dates, and specific details. If they're false, why haven't you sued for defamation? Why haven't you provided evidence to contradict them?" The question seemed to break something inside Meghan. Her carefully constructed public persona finally shattered completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "Because the system is rigged," she shouted, her voice echoing through the studio. "Because no matter what evidence I provide, no matter how many witnesses I bring forward, people like you will always believe the worst about women like me. You've already made up your minds, and nothing I say will change that." "Women like you?" Colbert repeated, his eyebrows raised. "You mean wealthy, privileged women who use their platforms to attack anyone who disagrees with them? Because that's not about gender or race, that's about character." The personal attack seemed to be the final straw. Meghan's face contorted with fury, and she grabbed her purse from beside the chair with such force that it knocked over the glass of water that had been placed there for her. "This interview is over," she declared, her voice shaking with rage. "I will not sit here and be attacked by someone who clearly has his own agenda. This is exactly the kind of hostile environment that I've been talking about, and I refuse to participate in it any longer." But Colbert wasn't finished. As she turned to leave, he delivered what would become the most quoted line of the entire confrontation. "You know what, Meghan?" he called out, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "The real tragedy here isn't that you've been criticized. It's that you had every opportunity to use your platform to make a real difference. And instead, you've chosen to play the victim while treating the people around you terribly. That's not inspiring? That's just sad." The words stopped Meghan dead in her tracks. She spun around, her face a mask of pure fury, her carefully styled hair now slightly disheveled from her agitated movements. "How dare you!" she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. How dare you sit there in your privileged position and lecture me about making a difference? You have no idea what I've sacrificed, what I've given up, what I've endured to try to change things." "What you've endured," Colbert shot back, now fully committed to the confrontation. "You married into one of the most privileged families in the world, used that platform to build a media empire, and then burned every bridge behind you when people didn't bow to your every demand. That's not enduring. That's exploitation." The studio audience gasped audibly at the brutal assessment. Several people in the front rows were openly recording with their phones, capturing every moment of what was clearly becoming a career-defining moment for both participants. Meghan's hands were shaking now, her entire body trembling with rage and what looked like genuine hurt. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You don't know what it's like to have your family torn apart by lies, to have your children threatened, to have your every move scrutinized and twisted by people who decided they hated you before they even met you. Then why do you keep putting yourself in these situations?" Colbert asked, his tone shifting slightly from attack to genuine curiosity. "If the scrutiny is so unbearable, why do you keep courting it? Why do you keep making these public appearances and giving these interviews if you can't handle the questions that come with them?" The question seemed to hit something deep inside Meghan. For a moment her mask of rage slipped, revealing something that looked almost like vulnerability underneath. "Because I have to," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the studio's air conditioning. "Because if I don't control the narrative, other people will. Because if I don't fight back, they win." "Who wins?" Colbert pressed, sensing that he'd finally reached something real beneath all the anger and defensiveness. "Everyone who said I didn't belong," Meghan replied, her voice growing stronger again. "Everyone who said I wasn't good enough, smart enough, royal enough. Everyone who wanted to see me fail." The admission hung in the air for a moment, and for the first time since the interview began, there was something approaching sympathy in Colbert's expression. But it didn't last long. "But you're proving them right," he said softly. "By treating people badly, by lashing out at anyone who questions you, by playing the victim instead of taking responsibility, you're giving them exactly what they want. You're confirming every negative stereotype they ever had about you." The words hit like a physical blow. Meghan's face went white, then red, then white again. Her mouth opened and closed several times as if she were trying to speak, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she found her voice. "I'm done," she said, her tone flat and defeated. "I'm done with this conversation. I'm done with this show. And I'm done with people like you who think they can judge me without knowing the full story." She turned toward the exit, but then paused, looking back at Colbert one final time. "You want to know the real tragedy, Stephen?" she said, her voice carrying a bitter edge. "It's that you had the chance to have a real conversation with someone who's been through things you can't imagine, and instead you chose to tear them down for ratings. That says a lot more about you than it does about me." With that, she walked off the stage, her heels clicking loudly against the floor, as the studio remained in stunned silence. The cameras followed her until she disappeared behind the curtain, leaving Colbert alone at his desk, looking somewhat shell-shocked by what had just transpired. The audience sat in complete silence for several long seconds before someone started clapping slowly. Others joined in, though it was unclear whether they were applauding Colbert's journalism or simply the spectacle they had just witnessed. The credits rolled and the cameras stopped recording. It was clear that something significant had just happened. The confrontation would dominate social media within hours, with clips of the most explosive moments going viral across every platform. Public opinion, already divided on Meghan's public persona, would shift dramatically in the wake of her meltdown, with many viewing her behavior as confirmation of the very allegations Colbert had raised. The incident would be remembered as a watershed moment in celebrity journalism, a reminder that even the most media-trained public figures can crack under pressure when confronted with uncomfortable truths about their behavior and character.